Hi, my name is Jack Petropoulos. I'm the host of Groton Matters, where we discuss important issues to the town of Groton. We examine them in depth, in a fair, thorough, and balanced manner, all in the interest of contributing to an informed public. Today, we're going to talk about Groton's Diversity Task Force. We want to give the community insight into this unusual, or maybe not so unusual, initiative here in the town of Groton. And we want to try to get an understanding of this issue or this initiative that really raises a lot of passion for people, but we want to try to do it through the lens of objective information. And to help me do that, we have Raquel Majeski here, who's the chair of the Diversity Task Force. And Raquel is a Groton resident and brings a lot of qualifications to this role as the assistant head of School for Equity and Community at Lawrence Academy. Raquel, welcome.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. I know there's plenty on your plate and taking the time. In preparation for the show, as we always do, we come up with an outline for the show and things we think the public wants to know about. But today, again, as we always do, we went and asked the community through social media what they'd like to know. And the feedback was amazing. It was more than we've ever had for any other show. And I think it's going to really help to make the show incredibly valuable. And one note is that, as I mentioned, this is a passionate subject, and there's a lot of passion out in the community about it. And there's passion for and in favor of initiatives like this, and there are people who wonder whether initiatives like this are really necessary. And you'll hear that in some of the questions, and I'll try to call out what questions that we ask and topics we discuss that came from the community, just so you can have some perspective on what we're talking about and why. So without further ado, we'll dive right in. We'll start with sort of high level of what is the Diversity Task Force, what's it all about, and then we'll go into how they're doing their job and what their tactics are, and then wrap up with what their outcomes are expected to be. So Raquel, I guess really maybe the first question is, what is diversity? I think if you ask 10 people on the street, you get 10 different answers, but obviously, I think you guys probably operate under some common or shared definition. And can you sort of help to share that with us? And how do you see diversity, and how do you see it specifically with regard to this task?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Well, it's hard to talk about diversity without talking about equity and inclusion. And so diversity is an expression of perspectives, it's representations of various identities. And so if you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, like a party, diversity, and I'm sure some of your viewers have heard this example before, diversity is everyone gets an invitation to the party. It's like, woohoo, let's go. Everyone's invited, you're invited, you're invited. Equity, though, has to speak to the policies, or if we're thinking about it as our party example, it's all right, what's in it? I've invited everyone to my party, and what is there for them? So I need to make sure that my party's equitable, that vegetarian friends have something to eat, that my vegan friends have something to eat, that folks can get into the party, whether that's through a ramp or if they need a bar to hold on to help them. That's equity in my party. And then inclusivity and belonging in the party means that everyone has an opportunity to dance and everyone has contributed to a playlist. So diversity is that representation, but now we're taking it a step further with equity and inclusion. We want everyone to be invited, but we also want to make sure that all of their needs, individual needs, are met. We also want to make sure that they can not only contribute to the playlist, but also be able to dance at the party.
Got it. You know, I think that's a great analogy. It's kind of neutral, it's kind of fun, but it has enough going on where you can really understand some of the differences and the subtleties. That's wonderful. Thank you. That question did come from the community, as does this one. You know, why was the task force formed? Is really the problem in Groton so severe that we need a task force for it?
Yeah, I think the better question, and that's a great one, is why not? Arlington, Lexington, those are other surrounding communities to ours, has a diversity task force. I know I've personally been contacted by towns in Connecticut, but why not? And there's never a bad time to invite people to the party, right? There's never a bad time to make sure that folks are included. So why not have a diversity task force? But specifically, what was taking place in town to get us there there was a great racial justice group that happened in our town, in our community, that existed even before George Floyd and the racial reckoning that took place this summer. And so that group has done and continues to do a lot of work in our town to move this conversation and bring focus and awareness to this issue. Specifically, this group worked on a video and did interviews with folks in the town of Groton, and they presented that at the school board a couple of months ago. So are there issues of racial incidents? Are there issues of microaggressions and macroaggressions that take place in the town? The answer is yes. And this group, this racial justice group, like I said, has been doing great work to combat that and bring those stories to light. But why do the task force now? Why not do the task force now?
As I recall, there were a couple of incidents in the schools, particularly of racial incidents that I think immediately preceded the formation of this task force and may have just been sort of, to put it crudely, the last straw for some of the select board members to say, we should do something like this.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the wisdom of the folks on the select board. They had a choice. They could have taken these incidents and have done things in a different way, but they saw fit to bring a group together, and I'm grateful for their wisdom.
Great. Right. Again, from the community, who's on the task force and how are they chosen? What do they represent?
Yeah, so all members, and I mean, it's a blessing to have so many community members. No one's getting paid. This is all in addition to what their current roles are. They're community members that represent different constituency groups in the town that relate to to identity. So Council on Aging, both of the private schools that are in town, Lawrence Academy, Groton School, ADA, I mean, you name it, we have representation on the task force.
Great. So the task force operates under a charge. All town committees operate under a charge. What's the task force's charge? I can bring it up actually and show it to you if you like, and show it to the viewers. We'll actually insert it here so viewers can take a look at it. But how do you see the charge and how is it guiding what you do? And then lastly, has it changed? And if so, how?
Yeah, so I think about the charge, and thank you for showing it. I think about it as in a bullet form of what we're trying to accomplish. So the first thing becomes studying systemic racism, and I talk openly about this, that with diversity work, much of it, the first step is recognizing your bias. We all bring it to the table. I have bias and lenses that I'm working through. And so getting on a common ground as a group about that is so essential. So the first component of that is studying the systemic issues in regards to race, but know that our group is also doing that interpersonal work. So we're using resources to dig deep into that. Hearing from stakeholders is another component of that charge. Bringing stakeholders in. So we've been grateful enough to bring in Chief Lutz, for example, and to get his lens, which was important. So hearing from stakeholders and hearing from community members is so important to the work. Providing observations and recommendations to the select board is another part of that charge. And then we have a line in there that talks about educating citizens. And in the fall, we did a lot of thinking about that and agreed that one of the best ways to do just that, I mean, this is a great first step, Jack, in having me here to talk about that. So thank you again. But also to do things like forums and to do things like summits to really educate and bring some of that to light for the community. And so that was, you asked about evolving, and that was one of the ways that we changed and evolved. And Deirdre Slavin Mitchell is a part of the Civil Discord group, and we brought her in as a part of the task force to get representation there, to use the expertise of that group.
Great. I noticed that, just real quickly as a tag on to this, that the charge has changed a little bit over time, not in dramatic ways, but subtle ways. And I noticed that one of the ways it changed was to include diversity or equity with regard to individuals' abilities.
Yes.
And this was a question that we got from the community. Does your work include the work to make sure that people with disabilities are treated equally? And I noticed that the charge now says that. It's an interesting subtlety.
Yeah, so we always had representation from the ADA, but it wasn't explicit in the charge. And so what we did was make it explicit. And so
Great.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Great. How would advancing greater diversity and diversity awareness benefit the town of Groton?
Oh man, I mean, so many ways, right? I think one of the important things to mention is that this isn't a black, white, gay, straight accessibility. This is a community issue. This is community work. Who doesn't want to be a part of a community that is focused on hearing from different perspectives and engaging in a way that the community has mirrors for everyone? Like, that's great work. And so that's community work. And I'm excited to be a part of that.
Okay. Is this work achievable? You know, I hate to even have to ask this question, but there's been a lot of effort in our nation at this work. And, you know, there's this great quote that progress is not a straight line.
No.
And boy, this line hasn't been straight. But there has progress, but sometimes it can seem that there hasn't, right? Some days you wake up and you say, what the heck are we doing? Is this work achievable?
Jack, well, I hope so. No, you know, it's not microwavable, right? We're not going to get the perfect fix in 30 seconds. And we can't Amazon the perfect package and the perfect solution and it arrive at our doorstep in 24 hours. So we're in it for the long haul, and I do think it's achievable. And given our charge of making recommendations, educating the community, studying, I do think that there are important first steps that can take place. And we may not see the change in, you know, an instant, but thank God Groton has been around for longer than we have. And I'm sure that all community members eventually will benefit from the great work that we have set forth.
Okay. That's heartening. Again, from social media, is this just another example of bringing national politics into local government?
Yeah, and I keep having to say it's a community issue. That's not my hope. My hope that, and I know this town, I know this community, and I know that folks have a heart to hear differences of perspective and have a heart to rally around change for the greater good. And so, you know, our charge speaks to identity. Our charge speaks to making sure that all voices are heard. And I don't think that has to do with politics. I think that has to do with community. I think that has to do with communication. And I think that has to do with being in a position to listen and hear differences of perspectives.
But you see, this is a topic you can't avoid when you read the paper or watch the news. Is it really important for us to be tackling this, sponsored by our select board at the local level?
I think
shouldn't that be more national? Shouldn't we be talking about national laws and state laws that deal with this rather than task forces here in Groton?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think our climate is at a time of racial reckoning. And folks definitely on a national level are asking tough questions. But again, if we think about it in regards to our community and individuals and people and Groton citizens, I think there's no better time to tackle that work.
Okay. You know, you'll see questions later about taxes and et cetera. And I think that's something of what people are referring to here. They're a little worried about us focusing locally on these things and having unusual impacts locally that maybe are best left lie. I'm not looking for a comment on that. I'm just saying, you know, actually, this is a thread that we should all know and listen to and think about different people's perspective on this. And we'll see it throughout the rest of the show. And I think that's part of what we're hoping to do with the show is recognize everybody's perspective. Let's talk a little bit about strategy and tactics. So an initiative like this has to operate around a methodology. You have to have a way of doing your work. Do you bring a methodology to this, or is it sort of by the seat of your pants and we're going to figure it out? How are you doing your work?
Yes, I've been fortunate enough to be doing this work in schools and in communities and institutions for a while now. So I bring that wealth and depth of knowledge to the work. And, you know, again, starting with the internal work that is so important to what we're doing, tackling our own bias as a group and really getting common language to move the work forward is a part of the strategy. We were assembled at the end of the summer for the most part, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the nation's racial reckoning that was taking place. We have never, as a task force, been in a room together, and yet here we are in March, still doing great work. And I think that speaks to the heart of the great folks on that committee, but also to the point that, you know, we're organizing in real time, assembling in real time to move objectives and move our initiatives forward. And so it's a perfectly imperfect system, which diversity work often is, but the strategy of creating common language and working together as a team has caused us to really work well together and accomplish some cool things.
So it's clear to me from your background at Lawrence Academy and perhaps elsewhere that you've come up with ways of looking at this problem that is leading to your methodology for leading this group and participating in this group. Deliverables, what are your deliverables from this group? And touch on, if you would, I recall there was something about the select board suggesting that you would do your work for 6 months, come back, make a report or some recommendations, then disband. Dispel me of that if I'm wrong, but tell me what your deliverables are and address that particular issue, if you would.
Yeah, so right now we're in sort of what I think about as the second phase. So we started in the fall, right at the beginning of the school year, and I was honest with Mark and the select board that given all of the outside, whether it's a pandemic or COVID protocols, that we just needed more time. And again, to the wisdom of the select board, they granted us that. And so we were able to make, the Sundown Town was a great suggestion or recommendation to the select board. And we're also in the process right now of tackling two bigger things. We're working on town image. We're working on our partnership with other committees in the town to look at affordable housing, and we have plans there. We worked on and are working on the library fines, which is a great initiative that Deb Dawson has brought to us. And so those are our deliverables that we are bringing forth. And then by the end of the fiscal year, we'll see what the select board decides, if we will continue to operate or if there's other thoughts of how we can move the work forward in the town.
Great. Well, I did want to ask you about some of the issues that you've discussed. You just talked about a few. Is that all inclusive, or are there other issues that you think the public should know about as representative of the things, again, that you've discussed? Not necessarily things you will move forward, but things you've touched on and asked yourselves and maybe even the community, should we advance these? What are those?
Yeah, so one of the things, and I know we've talked about this before, I believe, Jack, and I know it was mentioned, one of the things that we were talking about pretty much in the fall was the country club and the changing of the name with the country club. And that was great. And we were able to bring in the stakeholders. Sean and his team at the country club is doing great work. But that was something that stemmed from, it's a country club. When we look at town image, is that the best way to describe that? After bringing in a stakeholder and hearing from the community, and Sean has been doing great work and had great marketing initiatives planned and already in place, that was an example of us deciding that, let's pause for that for now and look at other initiatives. And so again, in the shaping and the forming of our group and to really streamline our focus, that's an example of how an idea has come up, we talked about it, we heard from stakeholders and decided to move in a different direction.
Okay. Well, that sort of leads me, hearing from stakeholders leads me to another question, and that is, are these things that the community wants? And how do you know that they want them? Is it important that the community wants them? Do you sometimes have to do work that the community doesn't want? And is that desire universal? And if it's not, what do you say to those who feel otherwise? Talk to me about that if you would.
Yeah, so one of the things, and this has definitely been a growth area for us, and I don't say that in a bad way. I say that in an honest, transparent way, given the fact that we're shaping and building in real time in the middle of a pandemic. So one of the things we know we want to improve on is hearing from stakeholders. And because we have representation from different organization and community groups in town, we've always had our ear to the ground. So Council on Aging, for example, Michelle is a representative there. And so she was always able to include those voices as an example. We have representation from that A Better Groton, A Better Community Group, James Moore in the Facebook page. So we're able to hear from our groups that we represent. It's definitely been a growth area. And one of the things that we are working on, and Josh Deegan and Amy are part of our group, and this is their sub-working group, working on a way to develop community outreach in a better way so that we can better hear from the folks in the town of Groton. And so that gets the voices heard, and then doing that work of studying and educating and bringing things forward is an important step too, right? Making sure that when we're talking about issues, not only do they represent best practices, but they also represent community voices. And so definitely a growth area for us, but something that we own, and making improvements to do.
Yeah, but so the original question was, are these things that the community wants? You've talked a lot about how you are understanding what the community wants, but is it possible that you will believe that there are things that need to be done that the community doesn't necessarily want, or that elements of the community don't want? And I think the answer to that has to be yes, because of some of the initiatives that I know you are working on, or certainly will work on, or at least have considered. What do you say to people who resist some of the things that you would suggest need to be done?
Yeah, I don't want to make assumptions, and I don't want to get up into anecdotal examples, because I just don't know. Yeah. But yeah, we're human, right? We're human. And I'm going to disagree, and folks may disagree. And I think long term is making sure that folks' voices are heard in the process. So giving folks a forum to not only listen, but to share is a way in which to call folks into the work. And then giving them a stake. At the end of the day, it's the select board who's going to make the decision. We're only making recommendations. But in that process, making sure that folks' voices are heard and that they're listened to is one of the best ways to sort of combat any discourse that may come along.
All right, thanks. I sort of overdid it a little bit on that question, but it's an important one. I think that many people want to know. Real quick question for the folks at Facebook: how do I get involved? There are people who, when they hear about this, they want to get involved. And so, real quick, how do they contact you and or engage elsewhere to get involved? Real quick.
Yeah, it's going to be super easy soon once we get we're working on a platform for community outreach. So that's going to be great. Always reach out and email me. There's the Great Racial Justice Group that is taking place in town. So that's a Facebook page, and James Moore is a representative on our task force, and he's another great person to contact. But there's great work being done. So please, you can email me, and I'm more than happy to put you in contact.
You can also get in touch with you and the entire task force through the town's website, and maybe we'll have a little outtake on this show where we'll put up that contact information. Great. Just getting on to tactics a little bit. how are you going to advance your initiatives? I know you've sort of talked a little bit about this in the past, talking to the select board, et cetera, but real specifically, how will you advance your various initiatives?
Yeah, so one of the two things that we have decided to move forward with is hosting a forum and partnering with a housing summit. And my hope is that a community forum where folks know the goal, they know the objective, and they can get their voices heard is one of the best ways to call folks in. And then again, highlighting that community outreach forum that we're platform that we're working on to engage folks in the community.
Another question from Facebook is, do you expect you'll be asking the public for their votes or for their dollars?
Yeah, so when I hear that, I think of what's in it for me? What's going to be the impact of some of these decisions? Great question. And there will be impacts to certain things. I can only imagine, right? We don't have a stake in that. We're making suggestions and recommendations. And so the best way that I can think about the immediate answer is, I don't know, honestly, what's going to happen in regards to some decisions. But I know that folks will have a voice, and I know that folks will be able to share. And I know that ultimately, once the select board makes a decision, again, folks will be able to share out their thoughts and their feelings in regards to that.
Okay, sort of on a similar vein, and another question from social media, many folks, I think understandably, say the work of government should largely be to provide services, but also keep costs low. And one question, and that initiatives should be in place to help to drive costs down. So one question that we've got is, how will your work help to reduce my taxpayers' taxes?
I think on a larger scale, how would this work benefit me in a community? We know just from research and statistics, the benefits of a diverse community. And when a community is diverse and when community is representing all identities, folks want to be there. Folks want stores there. Folks want restaurants there. Folks want to move there. So diversity is a win-win for everyone in the town. And I think ultimately that's the strength of being intentional about increasing the diversity and equity of a space.
So I hear your answer to that is diversity will reduce your taxes or at least make your money more well spent by developing a thriving community. That's my take on it. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think I just did. But anyway, those are my words. Okay. Anyway, my take on what you've said, but I'll offer this, and we don't necessarily have to comment on it. In fact, I think it's better if someone else says it than you say it, and that is, we just watched some municipalities shell out an awful lot of money because of their responsibility with regard to racial issues. And the better a job we do with racial issues as a community and as a municipality, the better off we are in many ways, but certainly financially. Nobody wants to have to pay for the damages incurred to a municipality by racial inequity. We touched on this question a little bit earlier, but what tools are available to parents? This specifically comes from social media. Parents want to know what they as parents can do to advance this cause.
The library is doing such great work, and that racial justice group in town, I know Cynthia Williams has a whole subgroup that she focused on little kids and having these conversations about race and equity with babies, toddlers, preschool age kids. So there is such great work being done. And again, bringing that community outreach platform is going to make it easier for folks to be able to participate.
Okay. I think many people are watching and wondering what stuff you're working on. And we've talked about a lot of those things. You've talked about them at least twice in the past, but I'd love to get just from you a quick, very short bullet list of maybe the top 4 things that that you're working on that people are interested in. Not big descriptions, but just headlines. What are the 4 top headlines?
Town image, answering the larger question, is our town welcoming to all? If you think back to the party and the equity example, so we're working on town image. We're working in partnership with affordable housing and the different committees and groups in town. And so we're working on that. And we are always in thinking about smaller, we just finished up the library fines initiative and making a recommendation to the library trustees around that. But town image and affordable housing are the two main things that we're tackling right now.
Okay, thank you. I think that's important just to have a bullet list. People, it's easy to consume, easy to understand. Now I want to go to sort of in practice, feet on the ground, what's really happening. And the first question again comes from social media. Do you think we've already had a measure, that we already have a measure of diversity here in Groton?
It depends on how the person is defining diversity. And again, it's one thing to be diverse, and that's great. And do I personally see? I have the gift of being in a boarding school environment. So I see diversity every single day. It's a blessing, right? But the next best question is, is it time to move beyond that? And is it equitable? And is it a space of inclusivity and belonging? And that's where we're trying to be.
Okay. What was it like? What has it been like to form this group? We just haven't had a group like this in Groton, at least formed by our government. There are, as you mentioned, other groups. And every group, as I understand, has a sort of forming, storming, norming, and performing evolution to it. Groups change, members change over time. You've been around, as you mentioned, 9 months. What has the formation of your group been like with regard to that, and especially with regard to the changing members?
Yeah, so bringing in someone from the Civil Discourse Project, the group in town, was just extremely important but necessary change. That skill set is only going to add value to our group. We did have representation from the school board. They're working on and tackling some great initiatives there. And so we decided we would use them as a stakeholder rather than having them as a representation on the group. And so that was the shift. But I mean, overall, again, like thanking the select board and their wisdom and their expertise in informing this and seeing this as a priority in the town has been amazing.
Okay, great. How do you think the public sees your work so far? And how will you advance that relationship?
Yeah, I think like many people, when they hear diversity, for some, it's like a four-letter word. And that's just the reality. Because of cancel culture, or I've heard it, accountability culture, shame, blame, guilt, I can imagine that some folks are skeptical. I think overwhelmingly, though, folks have been extremely receptive and see this as a necessary work. The conversation in our nation is changing, right? This time last year, we weren't having the conversations in the depth and to the degree that we're having them now. And I think for many people, that's been welcoming.
Okay, sort of along the same lines, and this is a question that really didn't come from social media, but I think it really represents a lot of people's views of this, and that is, how do I understand the acronym LGBTQ or LGBTQ and its evolution? It evolves depending on who you talk to. The acronym is lengthened or shortened, and what does that mean? And what does it mean from someone like yourself who has as their profession this subject matter?
Yeah, so it's LGBTQIA+ has evolved. Language just in general, it has evolved and it will evolve. And so sexuality is an important part of identity. We know statistically that the moment you combine race, but once you start talking about sexuality and race, watch the statistics of discrimination plummet, skyrocket through the roof. And so our LGBTQIA+ members in our community deserve and will have adequate representation. And so the evolving of language and the ways in which identities are expressed will continue to grow as we learn more and as we research more as a society. I can imagine, and things will change even from my lifetime. The way we talk about things like gender has evolved. And so that evolvement will still continue to take place. But the important part of this work, I think, is to remember and to include all identities in this work. And so you spoke to ability, which is an important part of someone's identity, and LGBTQIA plus is an important part of identity work, and that deserves equal representation.
So I've thought a lot about this. But I've never heard the term plus added added to this acronym. What does the plus represent?
It's the nod to the fact that it will evolve, and the Q of queer and what queer represents and means. There has been an evolution of that term as well.
Yep, got it. That's great. Thank you. You talked a lot about your initiatives. Can you say that you've accomplished anything so far? And is accomplished even relevant here in this discussion?
That's a great question. Have we accomplished? I think anytime you bring these issues to light in whatever manner, that's important. So we formed a committee, and we brought issues of equity and inclusivity to light. And I'm talking here with you today, and that's important work. I don't see it as a checklist, and I know that's not what you're asking, Jack. I don't see it as a one and done, check, we've accomplished, because that's not how this works in our community. And so there will always be work to do. And so I think we can celebrate the successes and continue to move forward.
That's great, Raquel. Thank you. I sort of in the same line, is this one of the things that everybody talks about and no one really advances?
Right? That's a great question. That's not my hope. My hope isn't, and I think too, like nationally, we've changed. And I think folks have seen themselves as a part of the work, and folks are hungry to get involved and hungry to make change. So not on our watch, I know I can speak for the Diversity Task Force, will we allow that momentum to end.
Okay. This is clearly a passionate area, a highly qualitative initiative that you're on. But I'm always inclined to think of things that government does as qualitative as well, or at least measurable, meaning if it's worth doing, we should be able to tell that we've done it. And so I guess really my last question is, how do we measure what you've done? What should be the measure of it? And more specifically, if I could put the question like this, what would you like to be able to say about the task force's work 5 and 10 years from now?
Oh, man, so I agree. Like I'm data driven, and I know we will get there as we continue to do this work as a community, and as we continue to bring really fine tune and focus in on specific areas. I know that, and we will include some measurable steps there. So I 100% agree with that. Man, when I look back, 5, 10 years from now, my hope is that folks see this as a vehicle that assisted in moving the community forward, where we have a community where there are mirrors and windows for everyone, but a community where there's been sharing of perspectives, that there's been dialogue, that there's been listening, that whether folks agree or not, they walked away feeling heard. And that 5, 10 years from now, if we can look at that, and then folks can understand this work as, this is what my community does. It's not in addition to, we're a part of a community that is intentional about doing this great work. Oh man, Jack, that would be amazing.
Yeah, but those things, it's hard, because if 5 and 10 years from now, we are better with regard to diversity and equity and inclusion, it won't be like people sit there and every day think, oh, we're better than we were 5, 10 years ago. It'll be just our life. And it won't be until people say, why are we better? First, they have to notice it. And secondly, they ask why. And if they can point back to specific initiatives, that will be the sort of validation of the work that many people, including you and your task force, have done.
Agreed.
So I do want to wrap it up, unless there's anything in particular, Raquel, that you want to wrap up with before we say goodbye.
No, I appreciate your time, and then you'll be sharing out the charge and contact information, and we just can't wait to see more community members take part in the great work.
You bet. Well, I want to thank the Groton Channel, who has made this show and all the other shows just so easy to produce and so wonderful. This show will be closed captioned for people who prefer or need to watch that way. But Ashley Doucette in particular has just been a marvel to work with, and is as much a treasure as any other aspect of our town government. And I want to thank Raquel. Raquel, thank you for helping to guide this show and make it what it is, and for the work that you've done for the Diversity Task Force here in our town. So with that said, if viewers have any feedback on the show, if you want to express your thoughts about what we did well, what we didn't do well, what we missed and should get to, ideas for other shows, other things that you think we should do, you can go to grotonmatters.com and you can go to the contact section and figure out how to get in touch, or you can leave comments on this particular show. And those are really valuable, and don't hesitate to lay it on hard if you need to, but don't hesitate to give the good parts too. They'll all be shared. So with that, I want to wrap it up, and thanks again to Ashley and to Raquel, and thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.